time has come, my friends. After 5 long episodes, we are finally free. For the very first time, we finally have a different storyboard artist, and not only that, but this marks the first time that artist is also the director of the episode, an aspect that brings a level of cohesiveness to this that has not been quite felt up until this point. Gaku Yano is the man of the hour here, and I could not be happier with the results. One of the biggest issues I took with Yashima's boards was a sense of claustrophobia and lack of scale, like the field of view of the camera was pulled right down, even in wide shots. Any kind of isolated space felt like it had very little breathing room, and of course the number of flat shots were just endless. You can feel Yano's presence immediately in this episode. Despite the larger ship, Yashima's board never changed that claustrophobic approach last week, and yet Yano takes full advantage of the space, framing things from more of an isometric angle, often with these deep lead-in lines that make for really impressive compositions throughout this episode. No matter what kind of shot, the layout is always pulling your eye towards its essential details. But more than that, he's enforcing angles that maybe at a glance look simple, but are in fact very difficult to pull off. Shots framed flat from the side have been a real pain point for me across the past few episodes. As I've been saying, it's the kind of thing that can very easily give you that Family Guy look. This episode has shots framed from the side, but maybe you can see the difference here. Yano's not just putting the characters on a flat plane where the background is sucked in, creating a shallow and flat composition. He's situated everyone within a deep 3D space. You can visibly see how characters sit within that world and where they're grounded on the plane they stand on. It's so tough for animators to nail down these complex angles, but the results are so worth it. All throughout this episode, you can find characters framed slightly off kilter, and it's that approach that makes a world of difference from everything we've seen prior. One of Yano's most unique talents is actually that he can draw very well, which meant that he could directly correct layouts in this episode to ensure that his difficult boards were executed exactly as he envisioned. Of course, angles are only one aspect of a board, it's also about the flow and the way the direction of the board brings the narrative to the screen. We kick off the episode inside Pansy's toolbox. The camera moves through the toilet paper thrown at Goku. Glorio lighting a match moves us into the cave. Yano transitions from scene to scene in really interesting ways and actually builds atmosphere through the environment. There are so many shots of items in this episode that are actually drawn by the animators rather than painted by the background artists. It makes sense for the can being opened or the match being lit where something is moving, but the logs, the leftover food, that's just flexing, and I love that attention to detail. But the way those logs burn out, the cut to the ominous tree, the stomp of the Minotaur's foot drenched in a pink rim light, all that stuff is so well directed and carefully considered. There's genuine tension built, and that's so pivotal to the comedy working because there needs to be concern built for the undercutting to then actually be funny. Like the majority of directors on this project, Yano is also a fresh talent. He was trained up on One Piece and Dragon Quest only a couple years ago, and it was only in mid-2022 that he got to direct his own storyboard from scratch. For this to be only his second storyboard credit in the industry is remarkable, and I'm so glad to see Daima's production cultivate such impressive young talent like this. The focal point is of course on the action in this episode, and it's here I want to reintroduce Takumi Yamamoto, who is the animation director on this episode. I've mentioned him briefly since the show began for his awesome scenes across the series so far, but I want to explore just why he's a name worth remembering. Back in 2016, he graduated from in-between artist to full-on key animator with One Piece's Film Gold, where he worked under the much-beloved Kodai Watanabe, one of Toei's superstars at the time, who's since gone on to helm many great projects outside of the company. But before he left, he took Yamamoto under his wing and brought him to the forefront of people's attention with Tiger Mask W, a wrestling show where Yamamoto turned heads for his fantastic action scenes. Now over the years he would follow Watanabe onto shows like Procure when needed, but he was slowly becoming a force in his own right. He teamed up with the much beloved director Megumi Ishitani and did character designs for her short film, and they actually stayed close with him making an appearance on her world famous episode 1015. While he did also work on Dragon Quest like so many on this show, this wasn't the only funnel that led him to Daima. He'd already done fantastic work on the Broly movie under Naoki Tate and helped out with 2D effects work on Superhero. He seems to have a real adoration for the series and so far seems to be serving as kind of a main animator animator, having now animated on the opening, drawn the eye catchers for the show, and worked on 4 out of 6 of the episodes so far. It's actually really interesting to see his approach to supervision. While stylistically, he can be very hard to spot because Nikatsuru is the sole chief AD this week and redrew like 99.9% of the artwork, but you can still see him now and then with these quite wide-eyed Gokus and extremely angular brows. But what makes his corrections unique compared to everyone else so far is his fondness for correcting not just art, but the effects work too. Hell, even the movement. Virtually this entire episode looks like his animation as a result. The awesome camera spinning hand-to-hand segment is actually from Sander, but Yamamoto stepped in and improved some of the movement towards the end. It's nice to see this spinning camera shot executed really well, especially after I pointed out the missteps in a quite similar scene a few episodes ago. I think what I really liked most here is that Goku's fighting with his hand behind his back. The script never utters anything about this is just a really well thought out bit of visual storytelling to show how not serious Goku is about all this. Amazingly, the next scene is also by Sander, and it is of course astonishingly well animated and really goes to show the cool ideas that Yano has for action boarding. But check out the effects on the background animation on the floor. They look basically identical to Yamamoto's effects in this dice scene, right? Turns out that is not Yamamoto correcting him, that is Sander referencing Yamamoto's work to imitate his style to keep in line with the look of the rest of the episode. On the effects front, jumping into some other scenes now, there's a really interesting mix of approaches going on here. On one hand, you have Yamamoto's more digital looking effects, where you can basically see the raw brushstrokes straight out of Clip Studio, but then there's some more old school looking Kaneda effects for the impacts. It's this really strange blending of eras and something we haven't seen too much of in Dragon Ball before. It works really well, and I really hope we see more of that going forwards. I think my favourite sequence on that front is where Goku nullifies Glorio's beam. Just the way the beam sort of ripples out and slowly dissipates is such an awesome detail. And can I just give a shout out to how well composited this all is? If you've followed this channel before, you know I get really annoyed when you cannot see animators' shapes. But here, the smoke isn't blurred, the effect shapes are sharp, nothing looks like melted pizza. God, we are so far away from the Tournament of Powers eyesores. And I definitely felt that most acutely during the Super Saiyan power-up. Putting aside how incredibly well drawn and directed this is, the way it looks is so readable. Like there's glow, there's blur, there's steam rising off of him, but it never feels in the way, it's never compromising the underlying drawing like was often the case in Super. What's mad to me is that this was just a meaningless sparring match, and yet it produced animation work that matched the quality of some of Super's strongest episodes. Now it certainly wasn't the blowout that I expected it to be, but it seems clear that's probably coming with the upcoming Tamagami fight. Instead, what we did get was an episode with confident direction, one that used colours in interesting ways throughout, the storyboarded sequences with the level of care not yet seen on Daima. It dropped one hell of a fight and still had room for insanely fun character animation right at the end. For me, this was probably the most interesting episode of Daima so far, not because it gave us so much action, but because it felt confident and cohesive and allowed us our first glimpse at what this team has to offer. This took a little while to come out this week, so thank you so much for your patience. The crazy strong corrections and largely unknown staff list actually made it a nightmare to do my job, so I had to take a little bit more time to gather information and even just like think about my approach to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it all the same, and please do leave a like and a comment if you did, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you next time.